the constitutional compromises. In Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, May 1787, the Founding Fathers had to come together because, remember, had been under the Articles of Confederation. They could not adequately meet the needs of the day. And therefore, there was the argument that we need to end our relationship with the Articles again, go back to the state of nature, and create a new social contract. All right. And so, we need a new constitution to hold government accountable and to meet the needs of the day. Now, this is the scene or a picture of the convention. Now, in order to have a convention, Madison and Hamilton began to even use George Washington's name because they needed the states to come in together. And remember, the states were not as united as one would think. Eventually, George Washington accepted to leave retirement, having retired as Commander-in-Chief, to come back to be the president of this convention. And so, you can see this room. Now, a couple of people in this room that you might recognize. Who do you think will be in a drafting room of the Constitution? I think for 1 second. But in reality, most of us will only know 4 of them, right? Out of the entirety of the whole convention. Of course, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin in blue. Benjamin Franklin is always stands out, right? And one of the reasons he stands out is because he spent many years in France. He was our first officer in France. He played the pivotal role of bringing France over to join America Cause for Freedom. You're talking about ships, finance, weapons, etc. So he's lived in France for a very long time. That's why when he's dressed is in blue, his clothing, he looks like a Frenchman rather than the traditional stoic American black and white, right? So he's more flamboyant in that regard, and even his behaviors and action will be more of a Frenchman. Anyway, that's Benjamin Franklin for you. Major founding father, played a major role. Other than George Washington, he would be really second in line to be the President of the United States because of all his contributions to the nation. Here we have Hamilton, and here we have Madison. That's the extent of the people most of us will know. Of course, I believe Robert Morris should be here, right? But there's a whole bunch of other people you know that are not here. Samuel Adams is not here. John Adams is in the Dutch Republic for the cause of freedom. Jefferson is in France for the cause of freedom. So multiple founding fathers are not here either because they're skeptical of what's going on here. They were not sure what they were creating, right? So some founding fathers refused to show up, while others are are abroad, right? So this is the convention. The other thing I normally ask students is this room diverse? Does this room look diverse in your eyes? All right. Now, most if not ever, everybody says, yeah, this room is definitely not diverse. They look like middle-aged white gentlemen who are the political and economic elites of their states. But in fact, it's a very diverse room, and we'll come to understand why. Because while they all need to leave the state of nature, and it took them 100 days to leave the state of nature to create a new social contract, that's what they're doing there. There's the need to consent, right? You remember what Locke said? People need to consent to enter a social contract. That's what makes the government created by that social contract have legitimacy, because it is based on the consent of the governed, okay? The challenge of having consent is compromise. There are compromises that are entered in for people to get what they want in order to consent. Now, most of these compromises will be ugly and brutal in their nature, but those are the compromises that were accepted in the founding and the creation of a new social contract, a contract that will eventually create a federal form of government. Now, these are the gentlemen who helped draft the copies of the Constitution, so people could debate. John Rutledge, who will be a second Chief Justice of the United States, first United States Attorney General, Edmund. So very major people. Third Chief Justice Oliver, James Wilson, one of the original Chief Justices, Nathan Grom. So very prominent legal minds, right, were tasked in drafting this document in order for people to debate, in order for people to give their thoughts during the convention. Now, what were the differences between the gentlemen that I showed you? You have regional differences, regionalism. Northern New England states, middle colonies, southern colonies, right? Middle colonies economically, or New England states are industrial, shipping, right? Export, import. Middle colonies somewhere in the middle. Southern are land-based, rural. This brings a division even in the morality. The question of, does slavery belong in a Lockean based society, in a Christian-based society? Therefore, you have abolitionists in the North, while in the South there's a wanting to protect slavery, and not only the practice of slavery, but even the trade of slaves from West Africa, the Caribbean, South America, and importing them to sell them in the United States. So these are the major challenges amongst many others that the states have to overcome in order to consent in these 100 days. The first compromise is the Great Compromise, or the Connecticut Compromise. It's made up of the Virginia Plan plus the New Jersey Plan. Virginia is a large state, pays more on taxation, has a larger population. They believe they should have more people in Congress in terms of population. On the other hand, New Jersey is a small state. They want equality of states, and therefore they want representation based on equal number of members. So what does the Virginia Plan give us? It gives us the House of Representatives, right? It's based on population. We have 435 seats in the House of Representatives. Those seats are proportioned every 10 years. Every 10 years we do the census. We know the population of different states. So in the last census, some states gained seats, some states lost seats. And that's how that works with the 435. Of course, the New Jersey Plan gives us the Senate, which is equal representation. Every state gets 2 people, and therefore, currently we have 50 states, and therefore 100 members. So we have 535 members of Congress, right? That's also how we end up calculating the Electoral College. The Electoral College is made up of the number of representatives a state has. So if my state has 40 representatives, 38 in the House, 2 in the Senate, I have 40 electoral votes. But there's another region in America, or another space in America, that is not a state and therefore has no representatives. And that is Washington, D.C. So according to the 23rd Amendment, Washington, D.C. was given 3 electoral votes because they have taxation without representation. So that is a great compromise. The next compromise is the one that's most famous and most repeated, and most people even, you could ask them, they will be able to give you some idea of what it is. And that is the 3/5 compromise. Now, usually people say it means a slave was 3/5 of a person, or consider 3/5 of a person. Not entirely. The South wanted to count people held in human trafficking conditions as part of their population, which will have given them a very high advantage in the House of Representatives, which is based on population. Now, other states, especially northern states, didn't think this was right, and therefore they did not want slaves to be counted as part of the population. So the compromise was every 5 people held in human trafficking conditions will count as 3 whole persons in population count, which will determine the level of taxation or in terms of state contribution, and will also count the number of seats a state has. But there is no way that actual African Americans were given somehow the ability to vote or participate politically, right? So that's the 3/5 compromise. The other compromise is the Commerce Compromise. The Commerce Compromise is all about tariffs, all right, taxation. There's the argument that the state should tax things leaving the country and tax things coming into the country. Now, I will posit to argue, or I will say, that the North, since it's industrial, they're making secondary goods. The South is primary goods. This is secondary goods, primary good. Upstream, downstream. Primary goods are like grain. Secondary goods, bread. Who is richer, the primary good producer or the secondary good producer? I will argue eventually the secondary good producer. Who is richer? Hershey's candy bars, Cadbury candy bars, or the cocoa farmers in West Africa who are producing most of the cocoa. And therefore, when you have taxes when things are exiting the country, I argue it hurts more the commodity, the primary good producer. And so in this way, the compromise is there will be no taxation for things leaving the country without 2/3 vote in Congress, while the government could tax things coming into America. So we can have tariffs coming in, okay? And so that's one thing. And currently we can even see the discussions over who is really in charge. And the argument is Congress argues they are in charge of interstate commerce or international plus cross-border commerce, but versus the executive branch claiming they have ability to tariff without needing to go to Congress. So the Commerce Compromise: no taxation things leaving the country, taxation for things coming in. The Slave Trade Compromise. Now, the slave trade, not to be confused with the practice of slavery. Slave trade means I am going to outside America, I'm capturing people, I'm buying people, and I'm human trafficking them and selling them in the country. Some of the founding fathers want this to end on day one of this new constitution. They don't find the practice to be good or to be moral. But remember, there's a lot of states that are still heavily land-based, and therefore they're willing to overlook the moral question. Or rather, they rewrite the moral question. And therefore, it's still legal under this compromise at the founding of this new social contract to still import human beings and sell them in the United States. In fact, it takes two administrations, through the Washington administration, the John Adams administration, and actually it's the Jefferson administration. In 1807, a bill is passed. In 1808, it becomes official that it is no longer legal to traffic humans and sell them in the United States. But that does not mean the use of humans held in those human trafficking conditions for labor in the United States. That continues for another 74 or so years after the Jefferson administration banned the slave trade, right? And we can see the entrenchment and protections for slavery even in the Constitution. One example is Article 2, Section 4, or Article 4, Section 2 of the Constitution, which said, no person held in service or labor in one state under the laws thereof, escaping into another, shall in consequence of any law or consequent regulation be discharged of such labor, but shall be delivered upon the claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. They put this in the Constitution because they understood, according to the Constitution, there are articles and amendments. But now this is an article. That is what was original at the document at the founding of the new Constitution. So, Article 6 of the Constitution has the Supremacy Clause. The Supremacy Clause of Article 6 says that the federal Constitution and national laws are the supreme law of the land. Therefore, even if your state has other laws, the national law supersedes. So if the national law says, even if as a slave you escape to a free state, where slavery is disallowed, that you cannot stop somebody from going and capturing that slave and bringing them back down for labor because the superior law has given such person the right to do so. So that's the slave trade compromise and some of the politics that was going on at the time. So make sure you've studied up on the constitutional compromises.